In the winter of 1883, in a small mining town called Red Hollow, high up in the Rocky Mountains, a man named Thomas disappeared. Red Hollow wasn't much. A handful of wooden houses, a crooked saloon, a church, and the deep black mouth of the old glory mine. Most men there didn't come to live. They came to get rich or die trying. That December, the snow started early and didn't stop. Weeks of relentless storms cut the town off from the world. Supplies ran low, tempers ran high, and death came easy. Thomas was 25, tough from working underground, his hands rough and calloused, his voice a low, steady rumble. People said he was smart, too smart maybe, and stubborn as hell. On the night he vanished, he had been drinking at the Drunken Mule Saloon, celebrating a rich vein of gold he and his crew had found. Witnesses remembered him laughing, bragging he was going to buy a horse, a ranch, maybe even a wife when spring came. He left the saloon alone, into a wall of swirling white. Some folks said they heard him singing out there, some said they heard a scream. Search parties went out when the weather broke, but they didn't find a body. They didn't find anything. After a while, people forgot. In towns like Red Hollow, you had to forget fast. There were always new faces, new graves. Time moved on. Red Hollow dried up after the mine collapsed in 1902. By 1940, it was a ghost town. Nature took it back. The cabins rotted, the saloon's roof caved in, the trails got swallowed by trees and snow. Then came the summer of 1984. A team of university researchers hiked up to Red Hollow to study the area for signs of historical climate patterns. They found the ruins easily, but what caught their eye wasn't the crumbling buildings. It was a deep sinkhole that had opened about a mile north of town. Strange because that area had always been solid rock. They descended into the hole cautiously, their boots crunching over ice even in the summer heat. Flashlights swept across the walls. One of them caught something odd. Something that didn't belong. It looked like a man, encased in clear ice, perfectly preserved. His clothes were old, canvas trousers, a flannel shirt, a heavy brown coat. His boots were worn and cracked. His face was tilted slightly down, as if he had been trying to shield himself from the cold. His hair was frozen in place, short and dark, and there was a jagged scar on his chin. The researchers thought it was a hoax at first, maybe some elaborate local prank. But the body was real. Flesh and blood, not a mannequin. Perfectly preserved right down to the stubble on his jaw. They radioed for help. Authorities arrived within hours. The body was cut free carefully, the ice loaded into a special transport unit and rushed to a government lab. The body was cataloged, tested, examined under microscopes. Everyone expected him to be a relic, something to be dissected, studied, then locked away in a museum or archive. But then the impossible happened. The ice began to melt slowly under controlled conditions. As the core temperature of the body rose, one of the scientists monitoring the process noticed slight muscle twitches. At first, they thought it was decomposition gases, but the movements got stronger, the chest convulsed, the eyelids fluttered. Suddenly, in front of a half-dozen screaming technicians, Thomas Wren took a ragged, shuddering breath. His heart monitor, which had been flatlined, beeped. Thomas was alive. Doctors and scientists flooded into the room. They couldn't believe it. They restrained him gently, terrified he might die from the shock. But Thomas kept breathing, slow and labored. Over the next few days, he stabilized. It was nothing short of a miracle, or a nightmare, depending who you asked. The government kept the whole thing under strict secrecy. They gave him the name Project Iceman. They moved him to a black site medical facility hidden deep in Nevada. Teams of doctors, historians, and military personnel worked around the clock trying to figure out how this was even possible. Thomas was heavily sedated at first, mostly unconscious, but he had brief moments of lucidity. When he opened his eyes for the first time, the light blinded him. He thrashed weakly against his restraints. The doctors calmed him, feeding him liquids through an IV, speaking to him gently. It took weeks before he could sit up, longer still before he could talk. His muscles were weak, but not dead. His skin showed no signs of frostbite, his organs functioned. When he finally spoke, his voice was hoarse but clear. Where am I?" he rasped. The doctors told him he was safe. That was all they said. Thomas didn't recognize anything. The fluorescent lights, the steel walls, the machines humming around him, it was all alien. His memories were still there. Red Hollow. his friends, the mine, the snow. He remembered the cold, so cold it felt like knives under his skin. He remembered falling. He remembered darkness swallowing him. When they showed him a mirror, Thomas stared for a long time. He touched his face like he was trying to make sure it was real. "I'm not dead?" he whispered. "No," the doctor said. "You're very much alive, Mr. Wren." But Thomas could tell from the looks they gave him, the tight way the nurses smiled, the way the guards stationed at the doors never took their hands off their guns, that something was very wrong. He wasn't just a patient. He was something else now, something they didn't understand, and maybe something they were afraid of. Days turned into weeks. Thomas was prodded, scanned, and questioned until he barely knew what day it was anymore. He learned quickly that asking questions got him nowhere. Every time he tried to get answers, the doctors would smile tightly, scribble on their clipboards, and change the subject. They treated him like an experiment, not a man. He wasn't allowed outside. He wasn't even allowed to see windows. His entire world became sterile white halls, cold gray floors, and endless tests. One night, when the sedation wore off faster than expected, Thomas stumbled out of his room. The guards were gone, maybe called away to some emergency. He crept down the hallway barefoot, wearing only the thin hospital gown they gave him. Halfway down the corridor, he found a room he wasn't supposed to see. Inside was a wall of televisions showing news reports, presidents he didn't know, cities he had never heard of, strange vehicles moving without horses, giant machines in the sky. He stood frozen, staring at a small plastic calendar taped to the wall. 1984. 100 years. Thomas staggered back, heart pounding so hard he thought it might explode. Everything he knew was gone. Red Hollow. His friends, his family, his entire world buried under a century of dirt and time. He didn't have long to process it. The alarms blared. Guards stormed the hallway, shouting orders. Thomas turned and ran without thinking. His legs, still shaky, carried him faster than they should have. He turned corner after corner until he found an emergency exit door. Locked, but next to it was a heavy fire extinguisher mounted on the wall. Thomas ripped it free and smashed it against the door's control panel. Sparks flew. Sirens screamed louder. He rammed the extinguisher into the door itself until the metal crumpled enough for him to squeeze through. Outside was nothing like he imagined. He expected streets, buildings, people. Instead, there was desert stretching for miles under a burning red sky. Fences topped with razor wire circled the facility. Watchtowers loomed, dark figures with rifles scanning for threats. Somehow, he knew if they caught him again, he'd never leave alive. He ran. Bullets kicked up dirt behind him. Voices barked over loudspeakers. He didn't look back. His bare feet tore open on the sharp rocks, but he didn't stop. He ran until he reached a drainage ditch outside the perimeter. He slid down into the mud and stayed there, barely breathing as searchlights swept over him. Hours passed. When night fell fully and the search parties thinned out, Thomas crawled out and kept moving. He wandered for days through the desert, surviving on rainwater collected in broken rocks, eating cactus pulp when he could find it. His hospital gown shredded against the harsh ground until he was practically naked, his skin burnt and cracked from the sun. Finally, he stumbled onto a highway. Cars roared past him, monstrous machines of glass and steel. Horns blared. People shouted. Someone threw a bottle at him. But then an old rusted pickup truck pulled over. A grizzled man in a trucker hat leaned out the window. "You all right, buddy? Jesus, you look like hell." Thomas didn't know how to answer. He just nodded weakly. "Hop in," the man said. Thomas hesitated, but he had no choice. He climbed into the truck bed and collapsed against the side. The man didn't ask many questions, just handed him a bottle of water and kept driving. They reached a tiny town called Dell. Population maybe 50 if you counted the dogs. It was a forgotten speck on the map, a place nobody cared about, which suited Thomas just fine. The man, who introduced himself as Jack, took pity on him. He gave him clothes, food, and a place to sleep in an old storage shed behind his gas station. Thomas spent weeks there, slowly regaining his strength, learning the basics of the new world without drawing too much attention. Jack thought Thomas was a drifter with amnesia. That's the story Thomas let him believe. But the nightmares didn't stop. Every night he dreamed of ice swallowing him, of cold hands dragging him under, of the lab, the needles, the guards shouting. Sometimes he dreamed of something worse. a shadow moving through the frozen dark, something that hadn't been human. He tried to ignore it. Then one night, Jack's radio crackled with a news report that made Thomas sit up straight. A witness claimed to have seen a strange man wandering the desert, matching Thomas's description. Government officials were investigating unusual activity near the old test sites. There was talk of containing a biohazard, no names, no photos, but Thomas knew they were looking for him. He had to leave. He packed a small bag Jack gave him, a few cans of food, a battered map, a revolver with 2 bullets. He scrawled a quick note for Jack thanking him, then slipped into the night. Thomas traveled north, sticking to back roads and wilderness. He knew he couldn't outrun the world forever, but he could buy himself time. It wasn't until he reached the mountains again months later that he realized he wasn't alone. One night, as he camped by a dying fire, he heard it. The crunch of footsteps in the snow. He rose slowly, revolver in hand. A figure stepped out of the trees. Not a soldier, not a scientist. A woman, bundled in heavy clothes, a rifle slung over her shoulder. She looked at him with sharp eyes that seemed to see right through him. "You're him, aren't you?" she said. Thomas said nothing. "You're the one they're hunting. The frozen man." He aimed the revolver at her. She didn't flinch. "If I wanted you dead, you'd already be dead," she said calmly. "I can help you, but you have to trust me." "Why?" Thomas croaked. "Because you're not the only one," she said. "You're just the first." Before Thomas could ask what she meant, a low rumble shook the ground. Lights flickered through the trees, black helicopters, trucks, men shouting orders. They had found him again. The woman grabbed his arm. "Run if you want, fight if you want, but if you come with me, you'll understand everything. You'll understand what they did to you and what you really are." Thomas hesitated for one heartbeat. Then he dropped the revolver and followed her into the dark. Behind them, the forest erupted into chaos. And somewhere deep inside him, something ancient, something cold and powerful stirred awake at last. He wasn't just a man who survived being frozen. He was something new, something unstoppable, something the world wasn't ready for.